For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with low and penetrating.
Hello and welcome to the Snowbrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, professional mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of Snowbrains, and I spent 4 ski seasons in Japan from 2012 to 2015. It was a magical time to be in Japan, and it snowed more than I've ever seen anywhere else on Earth. I also broke my kneecap and blew my ACL while I was there, but it was worth it. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Gunnison Crested Butte. If you're looking for a heart-pounding Colorado ski trip this winter, check out Gunnison and Crested Butte. Ski Crested Butte's legendary extreme terrain for glades, bowls, chutes, and cliffs that will challenge your abilities and keep you coming back for more. After the lifts close, explore Gunnison Valley's mountain towns for unique restaurants and historical Colorado charm. Visit GunnisonCrestedButte.com to start planning your trip. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area. There are few precious places in the world like Alta, an independently owned ski area since 1938. Nestled at the top of the Little Cottonwood Canyon, deep in the Wasatch, Alta is a skiers-only mountain, known around the globe for its powder skiing. With an average annual snowfall of 538 inches, powder days are a way of life. My guest today is Kit DesLauriers. Kit was the very first person to ski from each of the legendary 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. She was also the first woman to have won 2 consecutive World Freeskiing Championship titles in 2004 and 2005. Kit was the 2015 National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. In 2019, Kit was inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. Kit has been on the North Face Global Athlete Team since 2005. Hello, Kit. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Really great because you're here because, as I told you before the show, I'm a big fan. I've been following what you do for a long time. So when did you ski last? It's September. No, it's October now. When was the last time you skied?
Oh, usually I could say like June 6th or something. This year was different for me. The answer is the last day of April in the Brooks Range. It was very different spring for me. Normally being high in the Tetons in the spring is quite literally like as much of a favorite experience for me as skiing beautiful deep winter powder. But I don't know. This year, I was one of those ones who switched sports earlier and really enjoying rock climbing this year. So that's what I morphed into. And the more I reflect on that, I think it's also kind of because it's somehow easier for me to hold on to that image and feeling of my last time skiing way up in the Arctic refuge. So maybe that's why the change this year. I don't know. But April 30th this year was the last time I skied.
Very cool. And we'll get into that more too. I want to learn more about your experience up in the Arctic and why it's so important to you. And how many days do you think you skied last season?
I never count. And I'm sure it's always right around 100, probably a bit more, but something like that.
That comes up again and again. I feel like I'm the only nerdy one that keeps track. I mark it in my every day in my calendar, where I went, who I was with, if it was a powder day or not. And almost everybody I interview here, these hardcore skiers are like, yeah, I have no idea. I don't keep track. So today, Kit, I really want to get into your 7 summits experience, your free ride championships, especially your eco-activism, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, and there's a lot more we could go on. So we're going to start with this rapid fire section, and then we're going to dig down into those deeper stories if that sounds fun.
Great. Let's do it.
Well, here we go. Rapid fire. How many days do you ski per year?
100 plus, but I don't count. It's just my way of life.
I like it.
And sometimes, to be fair, I have to say, it could be a better than nothing lap on Teton Pass late in the afternoon or, dawn or a short morning at Jackson Hole. but it's still skiing.
I used to have a 5-run rule for inbounds and at least 1 run backcountry. But now that I'm old, if I put skis on and slide, that's a day. And how many of those, or what percentage do you think of those days are backcountry?
I'd say 50-50.
Oh, cool.
And that's partly because I live at the base of Jackson Hole Mountain Resort. So skiing there is beyond the fact that it's really fun. It's super easy for me.
What's your biggest accomplishment in skiing?
I have to say the 7 summits. Yet I'm also glad as of this year to have skied the 5 highest mountains in the Brooks Range, which is another first. And
which is for our listeners, the Brooks Range is that far north range in Alaska.
Yeah, it stretches across northern Alaska, most of northern Alaska, really, in east to west. And and then also I'd say the Freeskiing Champion titles are definitely in the mix, because I don't know if we'll get to this later, so I'll just throw it out there, but I didn't grow up skiing or learning ski racing or being really like professionally coached at any point in my life. So it's pretty special to me that I was able to get to that point and repeat it. But if I got to pick one, I'd have to say the 7 summits.
That's fascinating. And I do want to jump into that free skiing a little bit later, because I didn't realize there was not a great connection between your upbringing and that. And I love that. What's your biggest accomplishment in life?
Remaining authentic to myself.
How do you define yourself?
I'm a soul who connects with the earth and who finds creative space in the mountains. I love deeply. I work for what I believe in, and that includes caring for the people and places that I love.
Great answer. Where's your favorite place to ski?
The Tetons. And then if you mean ski resort, then definitely Jackson Hole.
I like that. Well, I love to hear all of that. And then if you had to pick a few of your favorite mountain ranges, what might they be?
Well, obviously the Tetons and the Brooks Range are highest on my list, I'd say. Yet I've had life-changing and definitely soul-enriching experiences in a lot of others. Like my formative 20s, I spent in the San Juans around Telluride, Colorado. And my first ski expedition was in the Altai Range in Siberia, and that was incredibly special and spiritually mind-blowing. And then, of course, the Himalayas.
Yeah, gosh, I can't imagine skiing in the Himalayas. And I'd like to ask you about that Altai later, because that's something I did not know anything about until I read your bio. What would you do if you couldn't ski?
I'd probably rock climb. And then if I get to, dream and share other parts of myself, the idea of being a regenerative farmer is really grounding to me, and maybe even a life coach.
I love that. Yeah, I think that you'd be great at all that. And what is regenerative farming?
Oh, well, a perfect definition you won't get from me, but the concept of agriculture when you're replenishing the earth, I'll say, while you're using the earth. So you're using all aspects of it, right? So you may, if you're raising pigs, you would let the young nurse as long as they wanted off the mothers. Everybody's free range. And you have deep respect for the earth, always, working with the seasonal nature.
That's great. It sounds like some of the farmers that I met via Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. It sounds like they were really focused on that. What scares you the most in the mountains?
Having an accident that's life-changing.
What do you
Whether
love?
For myself or the people around me.
Yeah.
Just having an accident that's life-changing.
Absolutely. That is the most terrifying thing to most all of us via one format or another. What do you love most in the mountains?
I love the pure freedom to be me without any, other definition. There's no need to explain yourself. There's no need to define yourself like you just asked me. Define yourself. Just pure freedom, connection to myself and to my partners and to the place. And this mental state that is so enjoyable, that's like this relaxed focus.
What's the funniest accident you've had in the mountains?
Well, okay. There was a really funny little snafu this spring on my trip in the Brooks Range. I was really excited to climb and ski this mountain, Mount Hubli. That's the second highest in the Brooks Range, and hadn't had a ski descent yet. And I'd been trying to get there for a few years. And there was another aspect of the trip that was important, right? That was the snow science mission I hope we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But I am into climbing these high mountains, and I really wanted to go for this peak. And finally we were like within a day and a half strike of it, leaving camp. The snow was terrible. It was thin and isothermic and had wind skim all over it. And I was a little bit impatient leaving camp. Not everybody was ready when it was time to go. And so I just took off. My pack was really heavy, you know, like 60, 65 pounds. And then I just described how junky the snow was. And I was just skinning up this gentle hill to start up this drainage. And I hit this patch, or I came across this patch of snow that one ski just collapsed under the wind skim and the other one didn't. So I really slowly like started to fall over, and I was fighting for my balance, and eventually I just let it go. And of course I look over my shoulder and there are my friends, like, you know, 5 minutes behind me, all just standing there watching me laughing. And I have to say that, you know, right now we're actually working on some final edits to this film that we're making about that trip. And that piece made it into the film.
Well, that's fantastic.
So everybody else gets to laugh with me, because sometimes we got to laugh at ourselves.
I love
I was
it.
like, you know, here I am excited to go ski this peak, and I just fall over walking out of base camp.
I love it. And you're the impatient one, right? Trying to get everybody rallied out, and you're the one over on your side. How tall are these peaks?
So they're all around, the highest ones are around 9,000 feet, which doesn't sound that high, yet it's about 7,000 vertical relief from the valley floor.
And how many days does it take to get to them?
Well, it takes a few days. Depends on where you can fly into, but I'd say this one took us 2 days of approach. So 2 camps besides base camp, and then the summit day.
Wow. So they're deep.
Yeah, they're deep.
So what's the scariest accident you've had in the mountains?
In 2013, I was high in the Tetons with a good girlfriend. It was probably a 5-hour approach at least to about 12,000 feet. We climbed up a different exposure than we were going to ski. And she dropped in first. And on the ski cut, right at her feet, a wind slab released that cracked across the entirety of the start of the couloir. And she went down really quickly and was right at my feet. Like I was standing there watching her. And so I'll never forget this moment where we locked eyes.
No.
It was just her and I. So it was like this awareness. It was like this, no words needed. Just, I'll never forget the look in her eyes. And I tried to emulate it back so that she knew I was there and I would do everything I could. And then she slid out of sight, and the snow, I could see snow and train. I could see a powder cloud coming from an adjacent couloir draining into this one. And I knew the terrain below it constricted and it was full of consequences, and it went a long way. And sure enough, she did too. And I'll never forget the feeling of being alone up there, having to wait for the snow to stop moving to start my ski down in rescue mode. And yeah, I just, I turned my phone off. I switched my beacon to receive. The snow was still moving at my feet. And I just looked around in the mountains. I actually remember looking back at the Grand, taking a deep breath and getting some inspiration. And then I skied down. Well, it was a long way to ski down with a transceiver in your hand on receive. Right. And not pick anything up. And you start to question yourself, how slow should I be going? How fast should I be going?
Right.
And then eventually I came across a ski pole. And then just like our training says, once you start to see belongings, then you got to holler to see if you can get any contact. And I did, and I could hear her down below yelling back to me. So I skied up to her, and she was sitting on top of the snow and had taken over a 1,500 foot ride.
Whoa.
And then I've been wilderness first responder trained forever, since I was probably 21. So I take that seriously, and, hate to tell stories like this that you have to use it. But I think it's really important, and it's responsible to yourself and to your partners. So I was able to assess what was going on, and didn't seem like there was anything life-threatening in the moment, although there was definitely potential for head injury, and some other injuries were there, but nothing that was going to potentially take her life in the near future. And she had lost a ski. And so, that kind of like partnership where you think together in crisis moments was something that I really took away from that. And she and I had the same boot size. So I gave her my skis and I skied out on her one ski remaining.
Wow.
And yeah, it was an amazing experience. It was horrible and traumatic, yet turned out okay.
The locked eyes at the beginning of the avalanche, that is, I think, something a lot of people can relate to, when you have that intense moment of looking at someone in the eye when things are just going to hell. That I'll take with me. That was a great story, Kit. Thank you very much. And I'm so glad there was a good outcome. But sometimes there's not. And, I feel like we don't talk about this enough in the mountains, but it's part of it. We do lose people. How many friends have you lost in the mountains, Kit?
Well, I mean, friends of friends, legends that I've admired from afar or slightly closer. It's so many, and I don't exactly know. And I'm not a counter. And I also don't really want to put numbers on in place of the faces and the energy and the connection that I have felt and feel from those people. But if we're going to talk about super close friends, then it's the one and only Hillary Nelson that we lost last week, skiing off the summit of Manaslu. So I'm deep in grief on that one. And I imagine I always will be at some point. She was an amazing human, and she was like a sister to me. And we had some parallel paths in our lives as mountain people and mothers and teammates on the North Face athlete team. And it's just sad to think of this world without her, because she made it a better place.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know Hillary at all, and I was very affected by it. I had really intense dreams for a night or two. And and it's every day. It's really been on my mind. So I can't imagine what it's like for you. So thank you for sharing that. How many avalanches have you been in?
Well, I just told that one story about me being the rescuer, but since I wasn't carried, then the answer is really just one.
Oh, wow.
It was a wet slide off the summit of Mount Wilson in the San Juans.
Wow. Which is a 14er, correct?
Yeah, it's a 14er.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I was able to do a dance with my feet and skis to keep pulling them up out of the start of the slab enough times that I finally got in position to ski out to the side of it.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that you got out of that one and that you've only been in one. That's great, because avalanches, for as much time as you spend in the backcountry, it's such a constant threat. And so, that's great news to hear. It's only that one and you got right out of it. And have you ever been hurt while skiing?
Oh, yeah. I had an ACL tear, 2 ACL tears and 2 boot top calf tears, one on each leg.
Oh, well, hey, still not too bad. Was it each leg or the same leg for the ACL?
One on each.
Mm-hmm. Good. Even it out.
10 years apart.
10 years apart. Wow. God, ACL is a tough one, but if it goes clean, it could be okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Good. And you've been on ski trips all over the world. What might have been your favorite ski trip, or some of your favorite ski trips?
Wow. There's a bundle of them at the top. So I'd say, to say favorite, I'm going to switch it to my most formative ones. And for that, I would say the Alta in Siberia in 1999 was my first international ski expedition. And then Mount Everest was in 2006.
Yeah.
And my first time to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in the Brooks Range of Alaska was 2010.
So tell us a little bit about the skiing in Siberia, because I never even heard of that. I didn't know there was these big mountains. When I looked on the map, it looked like it was one block west of Mongolia and way in the middle of nowhere. So just tell us a little bit about that trip, please.
Yeah, it's Mount Beluga is the highest mountain in the Altai, and it's on the border of China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan.
Out there.
It's out there. And we went in the spring. So imagine going to Siberia in March. It was really cold.
I bet.
Yeah.
What's the access like?
The access was crazy. We flew from Moscow to a city in Siberia called Barnaul on a domestic plane, which was interesting as it was. There were literally like chickens in the closet of the airplane.
Nice.
And then in Barnaul, we got in a old Russian Sikorsky helicopter retrofitted to run on like kerosene or something. The whole side of it was black and it was crazy. And then we
Whoa.
flew 2 hours deep into the mountains and landed on the frozen Akham Lake, which is on the north side of Beluga. Camping was pretty easy there, except for the fact that it was minus 40, because
Whoa.
camping was in these Russian metal barrels. And because they have some degree of a meteorology station there. So we were able to use these barrels and at the base camp, and, we would ski and camp above that. However, camping above that was so cold that we didn't even bring tents. We dug snow caves.
It sounds like an intense trip. And you may have met your husband on that trip as well. Sounds like it was a
Yeah,
very much a
that's
formative
right.
trip.
It was. And it was my first ski expedition. And the year before, I had been on my first international climbing expedition, to Sikkim, India, which was amazing. And
Wow.
it was on that trip that I realized that I wanted to do that kind of stuff with my skis. So it was really special. And it was also special because the North Face was one of the sponsors. And I was not yet on the team. It would take me 5 more years to get a spot on the team. But it was the trip where I kind of started to hatch all these dreams that's what I wanted to do.
So the Altai, Everest, and the Brooks Range, your favorite places. Right. Is there anywhere you would not go back to?
Probably the summit of Everest, unless my daughters wanted to go, and then I'd go with them, but probably not to ski.
Makes sense. Skiing raises the ante quite a bit.
I feel like we even before what happened with Hillary, I feel like we barely got out of that one alive, and I'm grateful for that. And that was enough.
Well, I'm excited to dig into that in a little bit here. We're almost done with a rapid fire. Where have you not skied yet, but you'd love to ski there?
Norway and Bhutan.
Wow, quick. Yeah, Bhutan looks intense. And Bhutan is in the Himalaya for our listeners. What might be your favorite ski movie of all time?
I'm not a big ski movie watcher, but I got to say Warren Miller Timeless from 2019, because my daughters Grace and Tia were in it, along with Rob and I.
Oh, very cool. The whole family. Okay, cool. I haven't seen that one yet, so I'll put that on the list.
And I was only like 10 days out from this horrible calf injury. So I was able to go out for a couple hours and maybe have a few turns in it, but it wasn't what I wanted for my ability to be in it. But it was really amazing to see my daughters, who at that point were, like 10 and 11 or something, get in the Warren Miller film. So it was super cool. And the other one I'd say would be Lhotse, which tells Hillary and Jim's story of skiing the Lhotse Couloir in 2018. Like, generally I prefer documentary ski movies over ski porn style, but I just love watching beautiful skiing. So I really enjoyed this year's edit from TGR. And I especially loved the Teton segment, and then Christina Lusty and Sam Smoothie, line that they skied in BC was beautiful. So, but yeah, in general, for the top 2, I'm going to say Lhotse and Warren Miller 2019.
And I actually thank you for all that. I just made a movie date with my fiance to watch that movie on Tuesday night, the Lhotse movie.
Cool.
I watched it, but I knew I wasn't paying attention that well. I had some other things going on. So I really want to sit and just divulge, just really dive into that one, considering that how special that accomplishment was, and that Hillary's not here anymore. So I'm excited to watch that again. What challenges you the most intellectually on a daily basis?
How do you want to define intellectually?
Good question. I just think kind of mentally, what challenges you the most just in your mind and your mindset on a daily basis?
Well, it shifts depending on what I'm deep into at the moment. Like for the 4 years I was writing my book, that would have been my answer.
Oh, wow.
Now it's finishing this film that I'm working on. Right before that, it was the expedition planning for the film, as I led that.
And what can you tell us about the film?
So it should be out in November, and the North Face supported it in large part, in the largest way, and also Protect Our Winters and a number of other organizations. And the film, the genesis really is not just my project to climb and ski the mountains up there, because It's not really about climbing and skiing the mountains up there. It's about having a reason and an opportunity to go immerse myself in that deep landscape. But over the years of going there, I've just become aware of how incredibly fragile the place is, especially the coastal plain. And I'm a lot about justice. And it just, as much as I know that there is oil and gas under the ground on the coastal plain, I feel like as humans, we've got to be able to find another way. Because specifically, and there's so many reasons to enter into that conversation, but what I chose to do this spring was try to highlight the lack of snow cover on the coastal plain. At the moment, there's a mandate to open the coastal plain to oil and gas drilling. And inside that mandate, the BLM is required to figure out what conditions it can be safely developed for oil and gas extraction activities. And they have set this minimum average of 9 inches of snow on the coastal plain because we need to protect the tundra and the permafrost underneath it from the heavy equipment. So I went out there specifically this year to measure the snow depth on the coastal plain, because I don't believe, having skied across it before with Hillary the first time in 2010, that snow depth exists. So I wanted to storytell, ideally in a way that would bring in perhaps a different audience than has even engaged before, one that is excited about the adventure and the mountains and all that partnership, and with the reality of what's on the ground. So yeah, that's what this film is about. It's 2 parts. It's the mountain adventure and then our ski all the way across the coastal plain to finish on the Beaufort Sea and take measurements.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I'm assuming this is just going to crush it at the film festivals all across North America and more, hopefully. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. And are you able to share the name?
Oh, we're still deciding. We're in a working title now, so it's better not to share.
Okay, well, let's wait. We'll wait, and we'll make sure we announce that via our channels on Snowbrains for sure.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, in addition to expedition work like that, I would say that when I'm in prep mode for a speaking engagement, I'm deep into that intellectually, right? And I am actually also taking a course on coaching, on life and wellness coaching, which is an intellectual challenge as well as a scheduling challenge.
Yes.
And my work as a volunteer board member for Alaska Wilderness League is also an intellectual challenge. So, and then the overarching thread is to the challenge of keeping on top of it all and trying to be good at it all.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, thanks again for sharing all that. And yeah, I think it's so important to have these intellectual challenges, right? When we lose that stuff, I think life becomes less exciting, less spicy, less engaging in a lot of ways. So that's great. And I really love the life coaching stuff. I'd love to talk to you a whole other time about that. My fiance is really into that. We've been reading tons of books about, attachment style and psychology of relationships and all this. And we've learned so much, and it's made our relationship so much better. It's so easy because we have the nomenclature and the communication to avoid conflicts, and we can kind of see them coming a mile away. And I do think it's really important to share that information because so many people could have healthier mental outlooks, essentially, if they had that info, because a lot of it is kind of simple once you learn the basics.
I love that.
So I love that
it's
you're
a lot about
getting into that.
Yeah, it's about that, back to that authenticity piece and allowing yourself to be vulnerable and continue to grow.
What might be your favorite book or books?
It's a good question to follow the last one. This past week, it's been one called Roar Like a Goddess, which is brand new, and it's out by Acharya Shunya. Okay. It's for everyone, especially women who want to lead powerful, abundant, wise lives. For the long haul, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and another older one called The Seventh Son by Orson Scott Card. And it's I guess this theme between them about life being hard and having challenges and allowing yourself to access your own powerful magic. It's cool. That's the kind of stuff I like.
That's good. I can tell you like it by the big smile right now and the head bobbing. But Alchemist is in my top 5 too. It's really well written. It's a very good book. It's short, highly recommended. And a lot of it is just what it did to me. It changed my life. I read it at a really pivotal time in my life. And it literally, the part of the reason I'm on this path that I'm on is because of that book, because it really encourages you to go for your dreams. So I
I
appreciate
like
you,
that.
Paulo.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, well, thanks for appreciating that because I love that we have that connection with that book, and I'm assuming it did something similar for you. Um,
Hmm.
who has inspired you the most in your life,
My dad.
and how so?
Oh, he was a really good human. He passed about a year and a half ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He cared deeply. He taught me the love of the mountains, really, and to go after what makes you happy without regard for what society thinks about it.
And that's fantastic because a lot of parents don't push that direction. They push the fit in, do the society thing, go to college, get a job, all that.
Yeah,
So
he was torn, his that was required of him and it never made him happy. And so I know how hard it was for him to just like let us all be ourselves, and because he was bridging that and frankly doing some ancestral healing and changing that, and it was really really cool. Like I'd come back from doing something super exciting in the mountains and he's the first one I'd call. I'd be like, guess what?
nice.
I just solo climbed and skied the Grand. And he'd go, of course you did. Tell me about it.
Oh,
He would always say, of course you did.
that's so cool. Oh, I love that. Having that support is huge. And so many folks that make it to these elite levels like you have, you need that kind of support because it's difficult to do these things without that sort of familiar or at least really strong friendship support. So, well, thank you. So I love that your dad, the most inspiring person. Well, thank you. You survived the rapid fire. So we're going to dig down a little bit into some of your huge accomplishments, and we got to start with the seven summits. You're the very first person to ski the seven summits, and for our listeners, the seven summits are the highest peaks on each continent, on all seven continents. So she was the first person to do that, which is insane. And I guess the first question is obvious: is what gave you this incredible and pretty aggressive idea?
Well, I didn't think of it so much as aggressive, but it was definitely challenging. And for me, it goes to this theme that I always have in my life, which is I wonder.
Mm.
And I was competing on the free skiing world tour in February, I guess it was, of 2005. And at Snowboard, Utah that year, that stop on the Freeride World Tour was also the U.S. Free Skiing National Championship. And I won that event. And Dick Bass was there. He was the owner and creator of Snowboard.
Uh-huh.
And he gave out the award. So I kind of got to meet him. But what really happened was I was sick. I had this really nasty virus that had been coming on for a couple of days. So it was this really deep personal challenge to show up and, believe in myself and not pity myself for that physical situation and believe that I could move beyond it. And it also meant that I didn't want to go out and celebrate that night. And so my husband, Rob, and I went to dinner at the Cliff Lodge up at the Airy, the sushi bar. And, it just happened that we were sitting next to Dick Bass and his son. And so we ended up pretty much sharing dinner with Dick Bass. And then late into the night, he shared stories about his dreams, and he sure was a dreamer, and about the seven summits. And anyway, I checked out of his hotel the next morning. There was a signed copy of his book waiting for me. So I read it over the next couple months. And when I read, I visualize things, and I thought, oh, wow, all those kind of sound skiable to me. And that's how I got the idea.
I love it. And for reference, Dick Bass, again, the creator of Snowboard, also was the first person to climb all the seven summits, sort of invented the seven summits idea, right? And he has a book all about his experience that I forget what it's called.
It's called Seven Summits.
Oh, well, hey, clean and simple.
Yeah. And he wrote it with help from Rick Ridgway, who was with him for a lot of them. And to be totally transparent, there was another person doing it at about the same time as Dick. And I also count him as a friend, and his name is Pat Morrow. And he's Canadian, an amazing climber. And he was actually on that first trip with me in Sikkim, India in 1998.
Oh, wow.
And he and Dick were kind of I think they were probably both doing it on their own at some point without realizing that the other one was doing it until it came down to close to the end. And then there was a battle for who could get to Antarctica, and it's very difficult and expensive. And Dick won that race. And then, so Pat was the first person to do the 7 summits if we count Karsten's Pyramid as the one in Australia. And Dick was the first to do with Kosciuszko. So there you go. But yes, Dick was the first of the Dick Bass list.
Very cool. And Kosciuszko, which I can never say right, is in Australia, as the highest peak in Australia.
Right.
Very cool. And how fast did you climb and ski all these peaks? In what time period?
It was 17 months for the 6th of them. Six of them, which was after I got the idea. So what happened was Denali was a first and kind of a one-off in the spring of 2004, because Rob and I had met in Siberia. So that's what we did when we had vacation. We would go climb and ski a mountain. So we did Denali, and it was a one-off. And then when I met Dick Bass and read his book, Denali had also been a one-off early on for him before he got the idea. So 17 months for the 6th of them, not including Denali, but including Denali, it was a little over 2 years, 2.5 years.
Wow, that's very impressive. And was this kind of your full-time job, or you're still juggling the rest of your life?
No, I did not have a job as a professional or sponsored athlete until the very last one, which was Everest.
Whoa.
My regular job was as a stonemason. I'd been a stonemason for 12 years.
Wow. In
the summer, at that time of my life, I was all sorts of things in the winter part-time so I could ski. But I mean, I worked in a flower shop arranging flowers. I did odd jobs as necessary. You know, I would
Safe to say you were a ski bum.
Yeah, hardworking ski bum. And my husband was working, his career was just taking off. And so I really put a lot of effort into supporting him, because for us to have the freedom to do what we wanted to do, that made the most sense.
And what was his occupation?
Well, he really was a ski bum before that. He'd been in like over 20 Warren Miller ski films and whatever, and many other things, I should say, not whatever, but he graduated from the Cornell Hotel School and had long wanted to get into be a hotelier and development.
Oh, very cool.
He's really gifted at working with teams and taking on big, stressful projects that I would not touch. And so he built the Teton Mountain Lodge in Jackson, Wyoming for a ski client of his. So yeah, he was getting going in that world of hotel development.
Very impressive. And you were involved in that as well. And so it sounds like you didn't have a lot of support for this huge, impressive project.
No.
Wow.
I didn't. The thing that was really special, and you might like get this thread of, some of those other like magical manifesting books that I've enjoyed. I actually met a really special human being whom I'll just say was an angel that appeared at the right time. And he financed my 7 summits. He basically just wrote me a big fat check and said, spend it on skiing.
Fantastic.
And I approached him with this idea about the 7 summits when I finished that second year on the world tour. And he said, let's take it mountain by mountain. And so we did. And so it was like writing business plans for each different mountain. And every time I got back from one and it was successful, we worked on the next one. And so I had support in that way. And then in 2006, January 2006 was when I first formally became contracted as a member of the North Face Global Athlete Team. So I could count North Face as a sponsor for the Everest trip.
Wow. Well, I do want to kind of put an exclamation point on that. This is how hard it is to get on the North Face team, is that you basically have to be the very first person to ski all 7 summits. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I had already won the World Freeskiing Tour without
twice.
a sponsor.
Oh my gosh.
I did have a ski sponsor. Vocal gave me skis then.
Wow. And so again, to emphasize how difficult it is to get paid by companies in the outdoor space, the competition is fierce. A lot of people say they're pro or whatever, and really they're getting free gear. It's so tough to get to that next echelon. And this really shows how hard it is to get on the North Face global team. Oh my gosh. So thank you for sharing that. Well, I'd love to hear stories about each of The seven summits you skied, if you're comfortable with that. And I want to start with Everest because it's just so glaring. It just seems impossible to me from the footage I've seen how sharp that ridge is on the summit. So 29,032 foot Mount Everest. It's in China and Nepal. Is the highest peak on Earth and the highest peak in Asia. So can you kind of walk us through the process of skiing down Everest? I think a lot of us understand that it's very difficult to get up there, of course, but then coming back down as a whole is a totally different ballgame and a mystery, I think.
It's faster than walking.
That's good. That's good.
But not that much. And that might answer some people's questions in their mind as they try to visualize it, because we're not up there, making fast GS turns down the mountain. Everything is really calculated. And sometimes it's literally a turn at a time. Right. When I was skiing the Lhotse face down Everest, which was over 5,000 vertical feet, uninterrupted, mostly over 50 degrees.
Wow. Without
a single rest. I literally had a mantra come to me from somewhere, which was, like your life depends upon it, turn. And I would make a turn. And then I had one ice axe in one hand and one ski pole in the other at that point. And I would move them, right?
Switch hands.
Yeah. So the ski pole would be in my downhill hand and the ice axe in my upper. And then I would repeat the mantra to myself and make another turn.
Wow.
So it was really intense. There were a lot of intense moments right off the top. Well, the snow's really hard. What happens at altitude is that wind is the greatest factor, and it changes the snow very intensely. So you get really hard wind ripples. You also get little slabs. You get places where rocks are sticking out. So it was really tricky. It was like sidestep, slip, turn. And it was off angle too, getting off the summit back down onto the ridge. Ugh. So that was really awkward. And yes, faster than skiing, but not much. And then when we got down to the Hillary Step, we had dreams of skiing it, plans of skiing it. Yet Rob went down first because he wanted to film me skiing it, or I should even just say descending on skis, because it's just a bunch of tricky maneuvers. Like I said, especially there wouldn't be a bunch of ski turns, but he ran out of oxygen. Whoa. And passed out. Yeah.
Wow.
I wrote about it in my book. And then I asked Rob to also write his story in the book, because when you're at 8,000 meters, it's just whatever story you see, you don't get to really see.
Right.
From a different perspective, because the world's kind of got a small laser focus. Anyway, it was really, really tricky. And we down climbed a fair bit from the south summit, skied a little bit down the lower south face, down the triangular face, the balcony, to Camp 4. But we skied off the summit. We spent a second unplanned night. We thought we'd ski off the summit and go all the way down the Lhotse face to Camp 2, but we spent an unplanned night because of the situation that we were in up there with Rob and helping him get back on his feet. Mm-hmm. So our timing was such that we didn't get back to camp until later in the afternoon. So then we got up in the morning and Rob and Jimmy and I skied down the Lhotse face, which was a first ski descent, and it's still unrepeated.
Wow.
I guess we're 17 years out now. So it's the most exciting, challenging, dangerous thing that any of the three of us have ever skied. And It was we didn't even have a rope.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And Rob had lost one of his crampons up above. So
oh my god!
Didn't even have crampons. There was no other way out but for us to ski down it, and it ended with jumping a bergschrund at the bottom.
Jeez.
And that was after hardly being able to talk about it that night. With pretty much almost no food and water either, because we weren't planning on being up there. Yeah, it was intense. And so after that, then we skied on through a fair bit of the Western Combe and into the icefall.
Wow.
And we had plans. Yeah, we had plans of a way around it, we thought, but the timing was off because it'd been off from earlier, and the weather was shifting, and we knew a storm was coming, and we were really just skiing into the fog of a storm starting. And I skied right up to this huge crevasse and then just laid myself down and reached up with my arms crossed overhead to Rob and Jimmy behind me, just screaming at them to stop. I thought that the edge of the crevasse was going to collapse at any moment, and at least I could save them. And then from that point, I just shimmied my way back up, kind of crawled my way back up the hill, and we went over to the more traditional like climbing route. And Rob and Jimmy were successful. We skied a few ladders, like a couple of fins through crevasses. And then I just decided that was enough, that we were trying to make something happen that wasn't meant to happen, because the route that we wanted to ski would have been far over to the side away from the crevasses.
Right.
But anyway, so we skied well over half the mountain, and we skied from the summit, but that is the one that is not a complete ski descent of my 7 summits. And so it was the one that I had an asterisk next to for a long time. And in some ways I still do, for sure. But it was one that kept me from wanting to tell my story for a long time, because I just don't want to hear the naysayers out there.
Right.
But the reality is I don't want any hate mail. I've had enough of that. So please don't send me anymore. The reason I tell the story is really like, it matters a lot to people to just see something like that. That's not only like incredibly difficult and challenging and full of impermanence, frankly, but also where we had to make decisions along the way that were not about any of our own egos. It was about preserving and protecting the lives of ourselves and our teammates, and making the right decisions along the way. So,
well, you said intense earlier about a piece of the experience, and from what I'm hearing, intense doesn't begin to cover it. I don't know if there's another word.
It was like frightening and spiritual. And I don't know, maybe it's to be simpler to say is like going on a hunt into the dragon's cave and knowing that getting out alive will be a mix of awareness, decision-making, skill, and pure luck.
Unbelievable. And why do you think, I've heard some talk of this. Why do you think the Lhotse face descent has not been repeated?
It's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. And how so?
I am not kidding. There is not a single spot on it, except for this one rock about 2/3 the way down, that if you watch The Man Who Skied Everest, and Yuichiro Miura tumbled over that rock when he was skiing the Lhotse face in 1972, I think it was.
Wow.
So it's, other than his, it's never had a ski descent. The climbing route is called the South Pillar route, I think. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it's really, really steep, and it does not have a single rest. Not one, for over 5,000 vertical feet. And it starts at around 35 or 40 degrees for a few turns, but it quickly gets into 50 plus, and then it maintains that the whole way down. And then you have to literally jump a bergstrand at the bottom. And even though Rob was in a bit of an altered mental state from what happened the day before, he's got incredible air awareness, and he's very gifted. So he went first, and I was petrified, but I just knew I didn't want to go last. So I went second, and then Jimmy went last.
And Jimmy Chin is the Jimmy, right? Everybody knows Jimmy Chin's a big deal. And how big was the jump?
I don't know. It was pretty big. It was at least like a 10, 15 foot gaper.
Jeez.
With, but that's the smallest it was anywhere on the face.
Gosh.
And that had, it had just a really nice angle to it. So, it wasn't flat and it wasn't too steep.
But imagine, for our listeners, doing that after climbing Everest, kind of being out of food
and then skiing
water,
the Lhotse face.
Skiing the 5,000 vertical foot, 50-degree face, which, I've rarely skied 50 degrees in my life. And if it's for more than 700 vertical feet, I'm exhausted mentally at the bottom. For me, at least, the mental focus it takes to ski, what I call, that's extremely steep for me.
This went from 26,000 feet down to 21.
Unbelievable. Then you got to huck a 15-foot bergstrand at the bottom. I can't. And with a pack, and you're exhausted, and you guys didn't have a rope to look into other options for getting around that bergstrand. All in is how it feels.
That's why it hasn't been skied since. Now the Lhotse face has gotten skied, and I skied a portion of it also along the climbing route. Mm-hmm. Like that's the side that Hillary and Jim descended. And, that's also got a lot of consequence for sure. Whew. But it's different. Like when I say this is, 5,000 vertical feet, this is also about 5,000 horizontal feet, like a solid mile on the other side of the Lhotse face. This is the line that goes direct down from Camp 4.
Unbelievable. And Because I think I talked to Davenport about skiing on the climbers side,
Right.
like you talked about where they went to. And I think they only skied part way because it just got so firm and wind
Yeah.
blows the snow away. And I think that's part of it is there's the snow also is let's just say terrible, really firm.
Well, I
and
should have said
not
more about
forgiving.
that.
Yeah. What was
The
it like?
snow's really, really firm.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places where it's just shimmering blue ice.
Oof.
So the way that I saw the snow was in these shapes of these patterns that were like these tongue shapes of snow. And even then it's incredibly firm and it's got like ball bearings, sometimes the size of golf balls of ice on them. But you couldn't go to the end of one of the tongues because then you would have a greater expanse of blue ice to cross to get to the next one.
Ooh. Gross. Yeah. I mean, kind of sounds just extremely challenging. What gave you folks the confidence to go for the Lhotse face?
Well, I don't know. We just had it. We had it in each other and we had it in ourselves. And that was the feeling that I really had skiing over the top, was just this total confidence. Like you've heard me say already, I do like to rock climb, but this was like climbing 513X, and which I would never do. But that was my version of skiing it. So it was like this just total commitment and in ourselves and in each other. And it was like just a deep connection. We were in it and it was a beautiful experience. Yeah. Skiing Everest, like there can be these asterisks and that's fine. And there's no asterisk next to skiing the Lhotse face direct from Camp 4.
Very impressive. I don't see any asterisks from my side, that's for sure. One of the first people to ever ski Everest and the very first woman to ever ski Everest. And it was the final piece of your 7 summits. So congratulations. I still can't believe it. I remember when it happened and there wasn't enough footage or detail for me to ever be satisfied. And so to hearing it from you now, I feel much more satisfied, if you will. Because that is one hell of a story.
It was also the post-monsoon season, so there was nobody else on the mountain, and that made it really special. So, you know, if you want to ask if it's like, you know, easier or harder than another time of year, or I don't have any other thing to relate it to. That was our experience on Everest. It was a wilderness experience.
And you were the only ones there, which is not the case almost at any time anymore. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area, home to one of the first ski areas to open in the United States and the birthplace of avalanche forecasting and avalanche mitigation in North America. The skiing techniques, lifts, and lodges and ski gear have changed with the times, but there's a timeless spirit at Alta that remains. Perhaps it's because the generation of skiers who have been able to pass on their love for the mountain. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Gunnison Crested Butte. Searching for a university? Love to ski? Check out the Mountain Sports program at Western Colorado University in Gunnison, Colorado. The Western Colorado University Mountain Sports program allows you to compete in skiing, snowboarding, or other outdoor sports while getting a degree in a tight-knit, hands-on learning environment. Learn more at western.edu. Well, let's flip to almost an opposite of that. One of the other 7 summits is Kilimanjaro, 19,341 foot Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, which is the highest peak in Africa. And from all the photos I've seen of it, there's not a lot of snow or ice. And so I'm very curious, what was your experience skiing Kilimanjaro? Was there snow? Tell us all about it.
Well, the glaciers, as we all know, don't go anywhere near the summit anymore. They're probably like a half mile melted away from the summit these days. Certainly about a quarter mile when I was there, which means you need to go when there's seasonal precipitation in the form of rain everywhere else on the mountain and snow up high. So this was the only mountain of my 7 summits that I did twice.
Oh, wow.
The first time I went, there was no snow on the summit. And so I went back, did some more research about when the absolute rainiest time of year would be, and went back for that. And it actually meant that it was quite skiable. I probably skied about 3,000 vertical feet. It was really quite good too. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And what time of year is that?
Well, in that year, that was May.
Okay. And when did you go the first time?
June.
Okay. So you had to wait a whole year to come back. Wow.
Yes.
Very cool. Dedicated. Cool. And anything else from that trip? Kilimanjaro looks very special.
So Kilimanjaro was really special in a lot of ways. It was a logistical and moral dilemma for me because
Ooh, why's that?
Kilimanjaro National Park, Kinapa, doesn't allow any pleasure-seeking devices on the mountain, or at least they didn't then. I'm sorry, I haven't followed recently to know if that's changed. But that means no base jumping, no paragliding, no skiing. You can look up in the regulations and see what they decide to call
I was
pleasure-seeking
hesitant
devices.
to ask you about this because I have a friend that went and it was illegal and all this. So yeah, continue. This is great.
Yeah. So I sought permission the first time and it was denied. And then I sought permission again the second time and it was denied. And the second time I was aware that I was still going to find a way to do it, even if they denied it.
Right.
I believed, and I still do that, and I honor that a piece of their decision to deny it is because the people who live there and run that park don't have a lot of experience with winter conditions and snow. And so they would be responsible in their eyes, no matter what waivers we signed, for any kind of rescue. Or they believe they would be. And they would just be well out of their comfort zone. And I think that that's it. And so I was able to find a group of people who was willing to help me. I do share some of the stories of that in my book, Higher Love, Climbing and Skiing the Seven Summits, if people want more detail. But it turned into a lesson of trust in that I had to drop my skis off in town below the mountain before we started. And I wouldn't see them again until the summit.
Oh, somebody had to sneak them up there.
Yes.
Wow. Interesting. Are you able to share a little bit about how that happened?
I had to ski at a time when there was nobody else up there. So it turns out there were people who were on my team. I wasn't even really allowed to know who exactly was on my team. Wow. But there were people on my team that were stationed at different points around the rim of the crater at the summit with radio comms to make sure that there was nobody else around when I skied. Wow. And then I had to take my skis off just before reaching our highest camp. And then the weather, we were so tired of walking in the rain for a week, which we'd done on the way up, working our way around the mountain and enjoying it and acclimatizing. And then we were so over it that we walked 10,000 vertical feet down the rest of the day in one day.
I've been there before when you're just so done with being in the mountains, like whatever it takes, we're not even gonna sleep.
Yeah. We told our porter team, we were like, look, we'll pay you the 3 days that we are contracted to pay you. And let's go do it.
Let's get the hell out of here. Wow. And I know that we could dig this up in the book too, but how did they sneak the skis up there? Because there's not donkeys or anything like something big that you could hide it with. It must have just...
No, a really wonderful human carried them. And I never knew it. They were wrapped in some other kitchen gear.
Makes sense. Okay. So they hid it in the camp gear. Makes sense. Very impressive. Great story. Well, from a traditionally trekking peak to one that's very much the opposite, I'd love to talk next about Mount Vinson in Antarctica. So 16,050 foot Mount Vinson, Antarctica, highest peak in Antarctica. And I guess the first question that anybody would ask is, how cold did it get on this trip?
It got cold enough that my pee bottle froze solid, even inside an insulator.
Wow.
And then imagine that, right? Carrying around a frozen pee bottle. And what do you do with that?
That's frustrating.
That's insult. Yeah. And then we got stuck at the high camp for 3 days in a storm. We were the only ones up there. And
well, how high is that camp?
That camp was 13,000 feet. High. And so we had no way of measuring the temperatures when we were up there, but we were told later that storm, 7,000 feet below at the base camp, at the 6,000 foot base camp, they measured the temperatures at minus 35 and the winds at 70 miles an hour.
Wow. So for our listeners, minus 40 Celsius and minus 40 Fahrenheit is the same. So, so no matter where you're from, this is cold.
Yeah, it was incredibly cold. It was so miserable that Rob and I in our tent, we basically took turns taking care of each other for 24 hours at a time where the other person didn't have to leave their sleeping bag. Really? Because it was really about,
oh my God,
it was conserving energy. So one person would get up in the morning and start the stove and empty the pee bottles and make water, and the other person would just kind of lay there. And then the next day, the other person would do it all. And we tried to climb on day 3 but it turns out it was an eye of the storm. And we came back. I mean, we had to get out occasionally to shovel the snow out from around the block walls that we had made around the tent, the snow block walls. But yeah, so we tried to climb on day 3 and it was too cold and windy and stormy. So then we came back and we had day 4 to rest. And then on day 5 from high camp, we went to the summit. And at that point, the storm was just breaking. So, we could actually unzip our 8,000 meter hem suits for the first time down, like a quarter zip tee. We could unzip them a little bit, but we lived in those suits for 2 weeks.
Wow. Because I think when people hear about going to Mount Vinson, we don't understand the details. For it to be so cold that one person doesn't leave their sleeping bag for 24 hours and the other person takes care of everything, that helps, I think, paint the picture. Because I think what we're all looking for is the visualization, right? And that's something that you can really easily visualize. That is bitter cold when you don't want to get out of bed. Because it's just not, there's no rest once you're in that cold. It just wears you out so much. I mean, I think most people have experienced a day out in the cold, and even if you're not working that hard, when you come home, at least for me, I'm just exhausted because my body's been fighting the cold all day. Even surfing cold water can do that to me, just 2 hours, So to imagine being out there for days on end and minus 40 degree temperatures, that is impressive. So it sounds like it was about 5 days to the top, and then I assume from there you were able to zip out of there. Right. What you've already kind of mentioned some unique things. What else was unique about skiing Vinson?
Let's see. The view is unique about skiing Vinson because when you're looking out at Antarctica below you, it literally just looks like a sea of white. It almost looks like it's just clouds, but it's this expanse of the continent beneath you that's, relatively flat except for these mountains that you're in. So that's a little bit of like a mind trick. It's like a hallucination, but it's real. And what else was unique? Well, we skied a really beautiful line. What else is unique? It was really, really firm because I just touched on wind, right? And it's a desert there. So it is technically a desert.
Because even your storm,
it's got less precip than Sahara.
Yeah. And even your storm, it's the highest, driest, coldest, windiest continent, right? And so I think even your storm was probably just mostly wind, right?
Yes, it was wind and cold mostly. Mm-hmm.
And so, tell us a little bit about the skiing.
It was really firm, so firm that you're leaving your crampons wouldn't even leave a mark on the way up. Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So when you're walking in your crampons, they're not really sinking in. You're just the tippy points of them. So they need to be sharp for this trip.
Yeah. And that just kind of gives you pause when you're skiing back down the same line that we climbed and, we're trying to kind of follow our line. And it's like, it's eye-opening when you can barely see an occasional crampon print. And skiing with a hem suit, with a 8,000 meter down suit. That was my first time. That was really interesting.
Yeah. What's different about that? Just cumbersome?
Yeah, it gets really comfortable after about a week or so.
Okay.
And you don't notice it, but it is different.
You're kind of like the Michelin Man in a way, right? You're just like pillows wrapped around every part of your body, which would be odd to ski in.
Yeah, odd to ski in. And then there were some steep sections and then some flatter sections and some steep sections. And then below that high camp, there's back down this area that people call the head wall. That's right under some big seracs and has some crevasses in it and is also really steep. And I think another unique thing about being in a place like Antarctica is those temperatures really mean, kind of like my first trip to Siberia, where you don't want to be more than 3 hours or so from a camp because it's so cold.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's just a level of pressure and anxiety about being out.
Scary. Yeah, scary. And I can't imagine being out in those kind of temperatures. That is next level. There's no doubt. Well, let's flip to Denali. Maybe we got softer snow in Alaska. So 20,320 foot Denali in Alaska is the highest peak in North America. I think it's some other interesting details here. Supposedly the third most prominent and third most isolated peak on Earth after Everest and Aconcagua. And some say this can be the most difficult of the seven summit for the lack of porters, but I personally don't believe that. What do you think on that?
I can't really speak to the lack of porters because it's pretty rare that I've used porters anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing about Denali is that it just depends on what you get for weather and conditions and what time of year. And you can make any peak a different experience when any one of those three change. So when Rob and I went to Denali, we literally went like on vacation in the month of May in 2004. And we went because that was a good time for him to take off of work.
And people want to go. You went before this project had begun. This was just
this is vacation.
You guys just went skiing.
Yeah, this was vacation for sure. And so that just means that the timing was set for us because of our calendar. But for anybody who wants to ski Denali, June would be better timing because what happens at these northerly latitudes is it's too cold to precipitate until a certain time of year. So that's what we went onto the mountain on May 1st, I think, or 3rd or something like that.
That's very early.
Yeah. So we were opening the mountain. So difficult. Yeah, we had difficult because we had to make every camp up along the way. So the images and the stories I've heard of other people as they get dropped up on the Kahiltna Glacier and they start to walk or ski their way up the mountain, there are like camping zones that with the snow walls built and everything that have been, abandoned a couple times by different parties moving ahead the mountain on them. For us, that wasn't the case. We had to build every camp as we went.
Wow.
And that made it hard. And then we also had really, really tough weather. By the time we got to the 14 camp, there was a series of storms stacked up that the climbing rangers said stretched 800 miles to the west.
Whoa.
To which my next question was, how long does it take for 800 miles of storms to pass? So the wind was just honking up high. You could just see it, these big lenticulars over the top. And it was just really dangerous. We tried to push high. We did. We went up to 17. Just getting knocked down by wind, trying to go any higher. And so we retreated and then we went back up and we were actually in position to help for a rescue because we tried again and the wind was so bad and the cold was so bad. And I actually had some cold damage to my toes. Oh. We went back to the 17 camp and then there were some Koreans that needed a rescue who pushed to the summit in that weather. So basically almost nobody summited before us. It was a couple weeks of people trying and for the most part leaving. And so then after that, so we stayed and helped with that rescue for a bit. And then we went back down to 14 camp, which by then had now looked like a small village.
Right.
And we rested for a day. And then it seemed like there was a little bit of a blip in the weather. Nothing that we could really count on, but our time had run out. We'd been on the mountain for 21 days, I think. So we just went for it in a single push from the 14,000 foot camp to the summit.
Wow.
Because we were fit enough and we were acclimatized well enough to 17. And that was an amazing experience. Yeah. So we went to the top. I think it took us 10 hours to the top from the 14 camp. And then
that's fast.
Skied back down.
Wow. And which route did you ski and how was the skiing?
Well, we had dreams of skiing things like the Messner, the Orient Express, but that just didn't happen with that weather. So we skied back down the West Buttress. And then when we got to the 17 camp, we dropped down into the Rescue Gully and skied that, which was really exciting. It was really steep and the first place I ever got an ice axe out in one hand.
So it was firm in that part.
It was really firm. Yeah. Again, back to that wind had been so intense.
Wow. Very intense again. Doesn't cover these trips. I love it. I was lucky to guide Mount McKinley Denali one time. And yeah, we were in 14 camp for 10 days and it was just the wind. And I remember on my 30th birthday, we were going to make it to 17 camp. We went up the fixed lines to, from 14 camp to 16,000 feet something. And I was so excited. And we got there and the wind is just howling. And I remember looking at, the other guides on my teams, like, we're going back down, aren't we? So, yep. Damn it. For my birthday, I really just needed some movement. We've been in camp for so long. But again, for what she's speaking of, I can attest to the wind up there is nuts. And the people who tried to climb in that 10-day window got damaged. One guy, I think, lost 7 fingers, frostbite. I'd never seen that, the triangle of black frostbite people get basically between their face coverings and their goggles. I'd never seen anything quite like that. So the wind is otherworldly when you get to these higher elevations. And that's as high as I've been ever. So I can't imagine, what Kit's doing going up another, I don't even know, 9,000 feet from there. It's just, I can't imagine what the wind is like on these trips. But yeah, the wind.
It blows you over. It
can actually blow you over. I had that happen one time.
Oh, yes.
Right. I was actually, my feet were still kind of moving, but I was on my side. It happened so quickly. So yeah, so intense. So, and then from 14 camp down, did you get any good skiing there, or same thing, just firm and windy?
No, it was okay from there, but we wanted out, and I used to be a ski patroller at Telluride. So I said to Rob, well, we went around camp and we tried to give away all of our extra stuff, which we had. We didn't have anything.
Standard operating procedure at 14 camp. Yeah.
To be fair, we had taken on other people's extra because we decided to stay longer and give it another try. So we were getting rid of
extra candy.
Yeah. Anyway, so we pared down and we fit it all in one sled, and we tied the other sled on top of one. So we had like a burrito.
Nice.
And I skied it down like ski patrol style, and he tail roped it. And we actually had a pretty darn good time skiing down.
Wow.
It was some tricky teamwork, but it worked great.
That's great. And you guys probably got out quite quick being on skis and moving fast.
We did. And then we got stuck for another 2 days at base camp waiting to get out because
at the airstrip.
Stormed. Yeah, because at the airstrip, because so many people were stacked up. And then the plane finally came in. There'd been some heavy wet snow, and we'd all out there, stomping down the landing zone from the heavy wet down there. And our plane came to pick us up, and he said it was so tricky to land, and because of those conditions, the heavy wet snow. And he's like, "Look, I can take one of you in your pack, or I can take 2 of you and no packs." And we're like, "You just take us. We'll leave the packs. You can bring them as soon as you can." Time. We're out.
Oh, I would.
But that trip was 25 days on the mountain.
Ooh, wow! That's long, because a quick trip, I think, is 14 days, guided trip at least. Getting acclimatized to the summit and out. And then, I think my trip was 21 days. So, mine felt like, and when you talked about Tanzania, when you were just over it, sick of walking around in the rain, and you descended 10,000 feet in a day, pretty much what my crew did. We went from 17 camp because everybody was so sick of it, down to 14, reorganized our stuff, and went from there all the way to the airstrip. We took one 2-hour nap somewhere on the glacier on the way out. But we switched, so we traveled that night, quote unquote night, even though it doesn't really get dark, but cooler temps for the glacier. And when we get to the airstrip, we're so done. And same thing. Oh, we can't fly right now. So we literally put up our tents, got in them, and we got the radio call. We can fly. I've never seen our clients and the team. Nobody ever worked that quickly before, but that was like, man, people, you could see the efficiency and with real motivation. People got those tents packed. They got their bags packed, the food, everything was so quick, so perfect. And boom, got on those planes and got out. So that I can imagine that must have been challenging for you, 2 days of the airstrip, which is not uncommon.
Yeah. It's funny to hear you tell that story, because I just think about Hillary so much right now. And Hillary was the rare person who had that kind of drive on summit day, but most people would have it only when it's time to go home.
I've heard that about Hillary, that she was very kind and very open-minded, but different on summit day. Summit day was, we're going to focus, we're doing this, it's game time. Love it. Well, let's jump to Aconcagua. So Aconcagua, I've seen this thing from the air and from even just driving over the Andes. It's ominous. 22,837 feet is Aconcagua in Argentina. It's the highest peak in South America, and it's the highest mountain on Earth outside the Himalaya. So, and it's located in the longest mountain range on Earth, the 5,500. A lot of people just say 6,000 mile long Andes Mountains. But it doesn't snow a ton there. It's super high. It's got to be so windy. I've only heard one ski tail in my time of good snow on that mountain. And I think they got quite lucky because they even said later after the wind blew, you could see their negative prints, for the whole season. So yeah, what was it like? What was Aconcagua like skiing for you?
It's hard. And a part of it is what you just said, like it's dry. And I think it's something about the dryness there and maybe also the proximity to the equator that altitude feels higher than it would at a more northerly or probably more southerly latitude too. So it's a tough one to acclimate to. The headaches were very real. I remember playing with a pulse oximeter a lot, and my O2 sats would be lower than I would have thought they would be, and it was tricky. That mountain was also tricky for me because Rob didn't go. It was right on the way home from Antarctica, and he was wow. I'm out. I'm going back to work.
I'm done.
Now I think he wishes he had gone, and he may go back. But anyway, so I teamed up with a then member of the North Face athlete team, Damian Benegas.
Oh, yeah.
Was kind of like, along with his brother Willie, one of the mayors of Aconcagua, if you will.
Right. And they're local Argentines, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Argentinian father, American mother, I believe.
Oh, so very cool.
Yeah, they're a beautiful blend. And so they speak, all the local dialect really easily and speak English really easily. And what that meant happened for us, or contributed to happening for us, is we climbing the mountain with Damien. You're off, like might jump over to the ranger tent and say hi, and drink some mate, some mate tea, and get more jazzed up, and then keep going. And it was just this really like social thing. And Damien's really fast, so it was fast pace up and in between these camps. And then when we got to one higher camp, Damien went over and borrowed some, or I don't know, was gifted some extra fuel, right, to keep our loads lighter from these rangers or rescue rangers or whatever. And it was like, in the US, we would never think to do this, right? But this was literally like white gas stored in non-BPA free type of single-use plastic water bottle.
Oh,
so
wow.
Literally had like cloudy floaties in it. And
Whoa. As
we went higher on the mountain, we were using that fuel, and we had problems with the stove, and and Damien got sick, and who knows? It could have been food. It could have been altitude. There's a big piece of me that will always believe from my medical training that it was carbon monoxide poisoning from our impurely functioning stoves.
From your janky fuel.
Yeah. And so we went higher on the mountain together on our intended summit day, and the wind is just severe up there. Forecasts were really scary, but we were climbing this, and we were climbing the Polish Glacier. So I wasn't going for like the normal route because there really isn't snow over there. And I was going for the Polish Glacier. So we were climbing the Polish Glacier, and there was new snow. It was the biggest snow year in 20 years. So we were working hard, post-holing knee deep in places. And then other places hitting the wind skim and not going in. So just a lot of work. And then Damien just wasn't feeling well. So we got to a high point at probably about 20,000 or maybe a little bit more. And Damien's pace was just we weren't going to make it for whatever reason. He was sick. So we pulled over on the side and had that conversation. And then I think he might've suggested it, but I jumped right on it. He was like, you should just leave your skis here.
Oh,
come back. And because it's so much work to get them all the way up there.
Because they're heavy.
Yeah, just every little thing, every little thing counts. So I left my skis up there, maybe my harness too. I don't remember, a couple of other things, made a careful little cache underneath some rocks on the edge of the glacier. And then we went down, to that camp to see if he could feel better, and he felt worse. So then we went all the way back down to base camp. And then it was a good 3 or 4 days of him getting better before we went back up.
Wow.
And so when we went back up, we summited on Christmas Day.
Oh, that's pretty special.
Skied right from the summit on Christmas Day. And it was a bit of everything. The top getting into the Polish Glacier was the most dangerous wind slab I think I've probably ever been in.
Whoa.
I really didn't think it was going to stay adhered. What was going on was that there was this new snow, and then there is such persistent dry climate that there is no bonding in there. So that was the first place I ever took a belay on skis.
Wow.
And Damien wasn't skiing. So he
That's good.
just sat himself down in the snow and gave me a belay. And I, made, I don't know, a good 12, 15 jump turns down into this constriction. And then we set up, then there was this cliff band that would have been like a finals competition run at one of the free skiing events to ski through, with really high consequence, and the snow underneath it, besides being really steep where you would exit onto the glacier, it from climbing up it and from having to put protection in on our climb up, we knew that it was like 2 to 3 feet of snow on top of blue ice, of new heavy snow on top of blue ice. So anyway, we set up a rope, and I wrapped with my skis on about a 30-foot section through there.
Nice.
And then let go of the rope, and then kept skiing, and then skied all the way down to the end of the snow.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a very interesting one. It took a lot of persistence, and it was scary when Damien got sick. And again, it's a plug for people to be responsible and have some degree of medical training so you can figure out what's going on and when it's time to exit stage left.
Wow. That's impressive. And having that fear of a slab avalanche too is just wearing, really can wear you out. But I am curious, just for our listeners, how steep is it? Is it a challenging descent as far as steepness goes?
So right down the ridge off the summit is just nice. It wasn't challenging. So I don't know how to put a number on that. 30 degrees, whatever, undulates 35. But then dropping down into the couloir was really steep. And it was more than 50 degrees in places, but I'd say on average it was 40, 45. After the couloir, down the Polish glacier face, then I was not in wind slab, then I was in heavy wet. And it was like so much work to pick up my skis for every single turn. It was actually like almost kind of like bouncing my body enough to release for a turn. And it was, steep and heavy wet and 40, 45 degrees.
Wow.
For the most part, a couple places a little steeper.
And how did that work with Damien walking and you skiing? Were you skiing slow enough that it was fine?
Damien's like a mutant out there.
Okay.
He's like, he runs around the mountain so fast. And actually, like, you kind of know when you've hit 40 degrees or 45 degrees in steepness, because Damien doesn't need to turn around and face in at anything less than that.
Whoa, that's heavy.
To down climb. And so he would just like run ahead. So, I'm sure his effort was more than mine in skiing, but he would run ahead, and then with his awesome accent, he'd get in position to run the video camera, and he'd go, "Okay, Kit, ski."
I just got back from my 12th full season in Bariloche, Argentina. And I love the Spanish they speak is so unique, their accent, and then their English accent too. That's exactly how they say it, Kit. Well, let's jump to from some really intense skiing on Aconcagua to something a little bit more mellow. I'm anticipating. Mount Kosciuszko, which I may or may not be saying that right, is 7,300 feet. It's in New South Wales, Australia, and it's the highest peak in Australia. Some people talk about there being different high points in that. Maybe you could say the continent of Oceania, I think is how they say it. So there's a 16,000 foot peak in Indonesia. There's another one that's 15,000 feet in Papua New Guinea. It kind of depends on how people classify them, whether Asia or Oceania. But you went for the one in Australia, Kosciuszko. And so tell us, what was this experience like? Because obviously this is mellow. It's only 7,000 feet. But I'm still curious, what was that experience like for you?
Well, first of all, that debate is real. And I'll leave it for those who care, but I'll say a couple things about it. I was doing Dick Bass's list, which was Kosciuszko. Okay. And you heard me say Pat Morrow had done Carson's Pyramid on Irian Jaya. At that moment, he
climbed, not skied, correct, Pat?
Pat and Dick climbed, didn't ski. Right?
Climbed. Okay.
And so in my research there really isn't skiable snow on Carson's Pyramid.
Right.
And it's actually like death-defying situation to travel there through the native tribes. And I grew up with the geography lesson about continents being defined as the world's continuous expanses of land. And so if we, once you start to get into continental plates and geology, then maybe you get a different story. But I was going for the Dick Bass's list and going for the skiable ones. And frankly, it's also kind of fun and silly to have one that is not that big of a deal. And I think it's actually kind of a metaphor for life.
I like it. And so what was it like for you skiing there?
Well, I flew over took a week off from a big stonemasonry project that I was doing. And I was also racing my road bike in endurance, annual endurance bike race, 206 miles every year, every September, called that goes from Logan, Utah to Jackson.
Oh, yeah. They still do it.
Yeah, Latoja or Lotuja. And I don't do it. I haven't done it in a number of years, but I was doing it consecutively for years. And so anyway, I took this little break in September to go over there. So I went over there solo, also because I wasn't telling anybody about my 7 Summit ski project. And it's hard to rally somebody to go over to Australia to go climb and ski Kosciuszko. But there were only like 3 people in the world that knew what I was doing anyway, not even my mom or dad. So I just flew over there solo, landed in Sydney, rented a car, had to figure out how to drive a car with this driver's side on the other side of the road.
On the wrong side of the road.
Yep. And then drove up into the snowy mountains to the ski town of Thredbo and stayed at the bottom of that, and then went up Kosciuszko. I actually had like the worst head cold I've ever had. I was so sick. And stopped at pharmacies and bought every decongestant I could find on the way up there. My ears were plugging. And so because I was really sick and because it was springtime and I would have had to walk like in the dirt alongside the ski lifts up Thredbo to get up to Kosciuszko, which I don't mind doing. Normally in the spring, I love that stuff, but I didn't feel well. I took the chairlift up Thredbo and then started ski touring, skinning from there. Nice. And it was pretty hilarious because it was kind of like, oh, I think it's over there, and it's just this mound up high. It's not like a big peak or anything. And then there's a cairn on top. And there are a number of people that like to go do it, especially just like local adventurers. And I remember, I just told you that there were no other people hardly in the world that knew what I was doing. So the last thing I wanted to be seen as like, videoing myself, which Rob was like, you need to video yourself doing this because I'm not going to be there. Right. So videoing myself skiing off the top, I didn't want to talk to anybody really. So I hardly talked to anybody in a week. And that meant that I just hunkered down from the wind, even there, on the backside of the cairn on Kosciuszko, waiting for like these teenagers to finish their summit selfies. And they were joking like 1 down, 6 to go, for the summits. And anyway, nice. Then I just set up this camera and went, skied down, would come back up, do the video in a different way. And it was fun and silly. And then after that, and then I went and just ripped bump lines around the mountain the rest of the day. And then I went over to another ski resort, Perisher, and skied over there. And that was it. It was not very exciting. And it was silly and it was fun.
What a unique 7 Summit that afterwards you go do bump runs off a chairlift.
Well, Dick Bass had done that one last. And I was just really clear I didn't want to save it for last. It was just way too anticlimactic. So I wanted to get it done.
I like that. And tell us a little bit why the secrecy.
Well, because I've long felt, and I've also experimented with this and found it to be true for whatever reason. Some physics, psychic combo out there could answer it better than me. But if you share your dreams too widely and your plans before you do them, it's like the energy is dissipated. And so there was that piece of it. And it was really a personal challenge. I wasn't doing it for any level of, fame or notoriety. It was truly a personal challenge. It was an experience I wanted to have to see, back to that I wonder. I've always loved to travel and be in other cultures, and skiing is been the main medium of that for me. So I didn't want to have to, and I'm also, I started this talk off with saying that I value being authentic. And that meant for me that if any time in this journey, it no longer felt like the right project to continue through with, I didn't want to have to explain myself to anybody.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very cool. It's keeping that energy built up and inside you. It makes a lot of sense. So let's hit the last one. Elbrus in Russia. So 18,510 foot Mount Elbrus in Russia is the highest peak in Europe. And I know there's some chairlifts and some huts. So I'm curious what your experience was like on this one as well.
So traveling in Russia is an amazing experience. And with everything that's going on right now, it's unfortunate on so many levels. And it's probably something that's off limits for a lot of people to experience in the foreseeable future. Yes. But the culture over there is really extraordinary in the mountain culture that I've been able to experience, right? The first trip we accessed Siberia through Russia and got to be friends with some amazing Russians who were literally professional mountain climbers under the Soviet regime. Oh, wow. And also like PhD scientists, because that's the way that it was when you were like a federally sponsored athlete. You also kind of had to have another reason and purpose when you were in the mountains. Wow. So we got to know some amazing individuals in Russia who helped organize our trips and go up the mountains with us on that trip. And then in the Altai, they came with us. And then this one individual, Nikolai, did the same organization for us when we went back to the Caucasus Mountains to ski Elbrus. And that was in 2005. It was June of 2005. It was the first of the 7 summits after Denali. So the first after I had decided to do the 7 summit project. And traveling over there with a guy like Nikolai, who has this really kind heart and this fun, mischievous, adventurous side. There were all sorts of surprises like at every corner for us. It was really awesome. And that included an acclimatization up this hanging valley, which had an old army station, basically. One of the places, Ulu Tau, it was one of these camps where he had trained as a youth. Weird. So yeah, we went in this like army truck up a vertical truck lift to access this hanging valley. And we stayed in some barracks up there in this otherwise really decrepit and run down an old mountaineering training center. And we climbed and skied around there to acclimatize. And then we went up. I really wanted to check out what it was like at that ski area. So although our intended route to climb and ski was around the other side, was on the north side. Okay. So we went to the south side to the ski area of Elbrus. We took those lifts up one day and got to the top of the lifts and then went for a ski tour as high as we felt like we could with the time we had that day. So we got really high. Rob and I probably got to, I don't know, at least like 15,000 feet or something. We got really high. Wow. And we got really bad headaches and we skied back down and in time to catch the lifts down. So that was a crazy cool experience to see it from that side. That's and then cool. We got in this little Russian Jeep and drove for a day and a half or so around to the north side. Whoa. And walked all the way up from the river bottom on that side. Oh, wow. What was the vert for you? Oh, I don't know. The entirety of it. A long way. Like, yeah, I don't know, 10,000 feet or more. Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. It's a big walk. And how many days did you do it in? Two to the top. Yeah. 2 to the top. Wow. Yeah. 2 to the top. And then a storm came in as we were skiing off the top. Storms come from the south. So we hadn't seen the storm, but we had like 6 days of good weather or something. So we all know what happens after that usually. Oh, yeah. And the storm came in from the south. So it was really incredibly crazy. You don't want me to use the word intense again at the top up there, but man, the storm was coming in and, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face and the wind was blowing and it was starting to precipitate. And we skied off the top down the north side, away from the storm basically, and into every kind of snow you can imagine, right? It was icy off the top and then it was some wind hammered and then it was breakable and then it was really nice powder for a little bit. Nice. And then it was corn. And then we got down to the bottom of it and got stuck for 2 full days waiting out just gale force storm. Whoa. Wow. So your timing was good. It was good.
That's great. Wow. And that's so common in high altitude skiing is you just get every kind of snow imaginable.
Yeah.
It is hard to get your confidence up to really rip it.
Yeah, that one we actually could really rip parts of it, but it changes so quickly that you can't afford to rip it because you're going to move into a different kind of snow and it's going to throw you. And, then the risks of getting hurt in a place like that are so real. But, people who ask me, like, what's your favorite one? Which is...
That was my next question.
Okay. Which is really hard to answer. Of course. It's like, what's your favorite child or dog if you have multiple of either. But for pure skiing, I would say it's Elbrus.
Oh.
Like if somebody wanted to go ski one of the 7 summits and they just cared to go do one, I'd say it would be Elbrus.
Wow. Oh, that's great info. Cool. Well, I did not expect it to be Elbrus. So that's really cool.
I mean, the favorite,
I'd really like to do that one.
The favorite of the favorite would have been Everest, but not for the skiing so much.
Right. The overall experience maybe, but not the snow itself. Wow. Well, that's great. I just want to mention really quick that you were a 2-time free skiing champion, 2004 and 2005. And I just tell us really quick what your experience was like and where these competitions took place.
Well, my experience, it was one of like a lot of doubt and a lot of excitement and personal challenge because I was not raised on skis. So I didn't have any of these experiences that a lot of people who get to this point in skiing have, where they learn, when they're 2 and they get to go through race programs and other kid programs. The first time I went out alpine skiing, I was 14. And yeah, and let's just say it took a while to get good at it. It took well into my 20s, if not the end of my 20s, to where I could say I was really an expert at it. So it was just really exciting. It was a challenge for me because I had already been into ski mountaineering and I just wanted to push myself to the point where I felt like I could ski anything, anywhere in the world. And to be fair, at that point, I did not imagine Everest, but to be far more skilled and competent, at things like Beluga, for instance, in Siberia. So there were a couple of really important people that I met on that journey. And one I would say is Ingrid Backstrom.
Oh, wow.
Who probably could have taken the title those years if she wasn't just starting to become focused on filming with Matchstick. She did come to a couple of events, and I'll never forget that one at Snowboard where she and I were tied for first, and we were up there like in a super final. And I remember saying to Ingrid, if there's anybody I'm going to take second to, it's you.
Oh.
And she said to me the most amazing example of leadership and community that I'll never forget. She said, Kit, you don't deserve to take second. You deserve to win.
Wow.
And that kind of spirit is very rare. And it was a real gift from that moment because otherwise the community wasn't that welcoming because I was 34 and 35 years old. And I just jumped into this without, spending years on feeder tours like other people. And there's not that many spots for women in this sport, or there certainly weren't then. So to have, an older woman out of nowhere, 10 years older than most of my competitors and, be constantly on the podium was tough. And it was a point series title. So it really meant consistency and learning how to push myself and hopefully pick a line that I was able to ski without a mistake, because you don't get any mistakes in those things. It's different than the films. Nothing gets edited out.
No, no, it's brutal. I was competing at the same time. I think we competed at some of the same comps. I didn't travel that much, but I did the big ones like Snowbird and Kirkwood and some of the others. And I was terrible back then, especially because I didn't start skiing until I was 18. And so I was not very old at that point. And oh man, they're really difficult. I never felt comfortable. I never did that great either. And so I was always so impressed with people like you that did well consistently. And did you only compete for 2 years and you won both the years?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's the way to do it.
Snowbird, Kirkwood, Les Arcs in France, Blackcomb, Whistler. I did one non-Worlds Tour stop in Red Mountain, BC.
Oh man, I did that one once in the fog. It was rough.
Yes, I was there.
The fog with Captain Jack.
Yes.
I love Red Mountain. Well, thanks for that. Well, let's keep moving here because I want to get to the Arctic. So really quick, 2015 National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. Ridiculous, right? So what is this award and how did you win it?
Well, I had no idea this was even that I was even under consideration for it. So I was incredibly surprised and honored when I got that phone call. And it was largely awarded to me because of a project that I did in 2014, so the year before in the Arctic. So my first trip to the Arctic Refuge was in 2010. I put together a group of athletes from the North Face, all women, except for our cameraman and videographer. And we went up there to try and climb and ski a bunch of the highest mountains up there. And then I really wanted to ski out across the coastal plain to finish on the Beaufort Sea and the Arctic Ocean because I wanted to experience the coastal plain.
How long is that plain?
The Brooks Range, as it stretches like east to west across most of northern Alaska, that far northeastern corner, the mountains are only about 60 miles from the ocean.
Oh, wow.
And then as soon as you get like 80 or 100 miles west, the mountains are well over 100 miles from the ocean.
Wow, that's a long crossing.
So on that trip, as I was waiting to fly into the mountains, I happened to meet this person, Matt Nolan, who's a PhD glaciologist from University of Alaska Fairbanks, who was doing ongoing at that point, I think he was 13 years into it, annual measurements on the McCall Glacier related to the snow depth, the glacial depth, the rate of melt, and trying to identify how much longer there will be glaciers up there because they will be gone. What he would say is most of them, except little bits of the biggest ones, will be gone in 100 years.
Wow.
And so that was, now we're down to 80 something.
Okay.
And anyway, I met him and then he was kind of like, who is this woman who's coming up here to like lead this trip? And, I had 2 little babies at home at that point. And he was like, wow, because, it's an incredibly remote place. And I landed on it for a few reasons. One, because I'd always wanted to go there. I had heard about the debate of opening the coastal plain to oil and gas, and also that it's the most important calving grounds for the migratory porcupine caribou herd. And so anyway, I planned this trip to go up there and have this deep adventure because I didn't want to be gone from my little babies as long as it would take to go like back to the Himalayas, for instance. And I really like that deep immersion experience and exploration. So we went there and met Matt Nolan, and he kept in touch and he was like, will you come back and help me with some glacial research? So I went back in the summer of 2012. My job was to kind of climb around to some neighboring glaciers that were hard to access and do some snow science for him. Now, at that point, he didn't have the skills to access those glaciers. So he was basically teaching myself and 2 friends of mine how to run this equipment.
That's so cool.
And walk around these glaciers with, computer strapped to our chest and like 30 to 50 meters of cable out on different oscilloscopes trying to gauge the depth of ice left out there. And
wow.
Our data wasn't that great.
Oh, no.
But we tried. And so we kept in touch. And the end of 2013, I said, hey, I want to go back up there. And I know that didn't work out. How can I help? So in 2014, I secured a grant from National Geographic's Expeditions Council to go back up there with Matt Nolan. He didn't go into the field with us that time, but I went with a small team with 2 friends, and I carried a differential GPS with me. Matt's idea, the basis of the scientific research, was that I would measure topographic points that he could then measure also from the sky and prove this new method of aerial photogrammetry, which he had devised, that would work better than this other way that he had sent us out with his oscilloscope and all this cable and computers. So now he could do it with DSLR cameras from the sky, and he calls it FODAR. It's a style of aerial photogrammetry. So I said, well, hey, can we measure the highest mountains? Because that's what I'd like to do. And I think I've skied one of them, but the maps had differing answers as to what was the highest. So he said, sure. And let's also measure some different rock outcrops in other places so that I can have more data points. So we did that. And that meant that I made a second ski descent of Mount Isto, which we now know is the highest. And I made a ski descent of Chamberlain, which had already had his first ski descent, but it was my first. And that data then proved what were the highest mountains. So then that just took me into the next, 6-8 years where I had realized then from our work, which turned into a full peer-reviewed scientific paper in the journal Cryosphere, what are the highest mountains in the U.S. Arctic. So now all the maps have been changed.
Wow, congrats. That's so cool.
Yeah. And so that meant that now I knew what were the 5 highest mountains, and Mount Hubli is the second highest, and it hadn't had a ski descent. And I had already skied the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, some of them twice. So I went back this year and with the objective to climb and ski Mount Hubli, but then also to measure the snow depth out on the coastal plain, because over the years of being there, and even when I'm home and immersed in the realities of opening the coastal plain to oil and gas drilling and the legislation around it, and I lend my voice to the advocacy for protecting it from that, I'm just aware that we have this 9-inch average in the mandate of what needs to exist across this 1.5 million acre coastal plain. How do you measure across that kind of expanse in the first place? But yeah, that snow depth has to be in place in order for these extractive heavy equipment to travel over it. And if it's not, then you have damage to the tundra and the permafrost underneath it, which then increases the melting of the permafrost, which is contributing methane gas to the atmosphere, and perhaps as much as doubling the CO2 being released into the atmosphere from the numbers that we would have without the permafrost melting. So anything that we would be doing that would increase the permafrost melting just seems like now a much different conversation than the original, like wilderness for the sake of wilderness. Now we still are talking about the social justice piece of allowing people like the Gwich'in, who have lived in harmony with the caribou and dependent upon the caribou for thousands of years. There's so many issues to look at the coastal plain extraction industries around, but I think the one everybody can rally around is climate change. So anyway, I guess I jumped a little bit over on the timeline.
No, this is a perfect segue. This is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That's what I want to hit.
So 2014 was that scientific piece that National Geographic, Adventurer of the Year, I guess it was. And to be fair, I was one of a few Adventurers of the Year. That's how they do it. But still, it's a big honor. And it was primarily for that work in 2014, but I've been continuing with it.
Well, congrats for the Adventure of the Year. It's amazing to me. I mean, I think that, to me, that's the coolest possible award there is. I mean, it just, they had the ring to it, the National Geographic, the Adventurer, and it's no light competition either, right? So there's some heavy hitters out there that are in there with you. So congrats on that. That's so cool.
Including Hillary Nelson.
Including Hillary Nelson. Well, that's so cool. I love that. Come full circle. And that you're doing it in a way that is helping to preserve a very important and very special place for us. And I thought Men's Health magazine had this quote about you that I thought was really just resonated a lot with me. And here's the quote. Her love of skiing remote and technical lines has evolved into a sort of extreme eco-activism. And that is just, do you agree with that? That's to me, that's such an awesome, powerful quote.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought to use a word like eco-activism, but sure, it resonates.
It certainly does. So let's just hit it right on the head before we move on. What is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? And you've pointed to it before, but why is it so important?
Well, it's the largest wildlife refuge in our wildlife refuge system. It's 19.6 million acres in the northeast corner of Alaska.
Wow.
It's roadless, trailless. There's no bridges. There's no signs. It's truly a rare, the only place of its size and pristine, intact ecosystem that is left in the United States of America. And it is a federal land. So it's everybody's public land. It is in Alaska, so there are people in Alaska who would say, stay out of Alaska. But it is not state land, it's federal land. And it's incredibly important for a lot of reasons. And as difficult as it is to get there and totally inhospitable most times of the year, it's also fragile. And it's experiencing climate change at a far greater rate than we are anywhere lower than that. And it's really like the canary out there.
And yeah, I've only seen pictures, but I know it's a very special place. We have some friends who have visited it, and it has been opened, I think, at least on paper, to oil and gas exploration, which it wasn't until, I don't know, the last presidential administration, I believe.
Yes, what happened in December of 2017 in what was called the Tax and Jobs Act. Mm-hmm. It was an effort at the very end of that year to balance the proposed budget. And so the idea that the Trump administration was able to pass through a vote of Congress was that the revenue from opening the oil and gas extraction and lease sales on the coastal plain would offset the tax cuts that were proposed. And that's not the case. The companies that bid on there's 2 required leases under that act, and the companies who bid on the first one, which is the only one that's taken place so far, have all pulled out.
Good.
And now we have all the major banks in the U.S. and now many insurance companies also refusing to fund and support those activities out there.
And hopefully that continues.
Yeah, yes, hopefully it does continue. But the bigger piece is that we need a reversal of that congressional mandate.
And is that something that you have been working on?
Yes, I'm a board member for Alaska Wilderness League. And so in that capacity, I do. And that's something that I hope to bring greater awareness to with this film.
And what can we do to help with that process?
We can all be educated and then take some action, reach out to your congressional representatives and let them know that you would like to see this repealed.
Terrific. Well, thank you for that. Well, let's jump to our last thing because we've gone over time, and I hugely appreciate you. So in 2019, you were inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, which is amazing, and congratulations. And how did it make you feel?
Incredibly humbled and honored. And yeah, the National Geographic piece is big, and this piece is even bigger. So it's kind of mind blowing when you just are living the life. And, we've touched upon it before. There's, you're just going along doing what feels right to you. And it's not looking for any accolades, any fame, any notoriety, just living your path. And then to have others recognize that it's an important path because it's helped them dream and imagine and push themselves and do something bigger, then that's what makes it really rewarding.
Fantastic. Great answer. So the last question is, what's next? What is next for you and your journey?
Oh, I don't actually know the answer to that right now. And you heard me already say that giving it away is give some of the power away. And I can honestly say in this exact moment, I'm kind of in an unknown. It is time to be making plans for this winter. But I did just accept a nomination for becoming president of Alaska Wilderness League's board of directors. I care deeply about that area and these major areas in Alaska in which Alaska Wilderness League works. So that's kind of a side piece, just another piece of me, right? Like in the mountains, I don't plan on stopping. Hillary's passing is giving me great pause and making me be in the moment. I'm not exactly sure where I'll go next. But the thing is I always tell people when they ask me, how do I get to do what you do? How can I be a sponsored athlete and a professional at this? And when I say you have to do what you do at the highest level because it's what you love to do, not because you'll ever get anything for it, which I think is something that my dad taught me early on. So I will keep doing what I do because I love it. And I would be doing what I do right now because I love it, whether I had any influence or compensation for it. That's the truth. And that's all I can answer right now because I am a big state of unknown and I don't know.
It's a great state to be in. I think so, because anything is possible. And especially with you, Kit. Kit, that's all I've got for you. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share here at the end of the show?
Just that it's been a privilege, and it's always kind of interesting that, when you're just living this life that people want to hear your stories. And so, thank you. And if you want to hear any deeper stories than these, then I did write a book called Higher Love, Climbing and Skiing the Seven Summits, and it's available through the Mountaineers.
And I will be ordering it this afternoon because I'm very much want to hear more. Kit, thank you so much. It was great talking to you. I'm blown away. These stories have been terrific. So thank you again, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much. You too. Have a great winter, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to the Snowbrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about Snowbrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Snowbrains.
Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Gunnison Crested Butte. If you're a diehard skier, you've probably heard of Crested Butte, Colorado. Located deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains at the literal end of the road, the Gunnison Valley that looks like a scene in a snow globe. The extreme terrain of Crested Butte Mountain Resort has been the stuff of legend for decades. But don't take our word for it. Come ski it for yourself. Learn more at GunnisonCrestedButte.com. Today's episode of the Snowbrains podcast is brought to you by Alta Ski Area, home of the biggest average annual snowfall in the Rocky Mountains. This episode of the Snowbrains podcast was edited by Jared White, music by Chad Crouch, and I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark.